Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today I'm here with Amanda Radke. Amanda is a fifth-generation rancher from Mitchell, South Dakota. Alongside her husband, Tyler, and their 4 children, they operate Radke Land and Cattle, which is a Limousin and Angus seed stock operation. Now, Amanda comes to the podcast episode with lots of experience in public speaking and 17 years on the road fighting for agricultural families, rural America, and national food security as a national beef ambassador. So you have a lot going on, Amanda. You're the host of your own podcast called The Heart of Rural America, which I love to listen to as I milk my cow in the morning. And then you've also got children's books. You are serving on an advisory council for the National Agriculture Campaign. Tons of stuff. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of tell us how this all fits in your life and how you got to where you're at today.
Well, I don't know how it all fits. And just, I don't sleep much. I'm very passionate about agriculture and farming and ranching families and the cattle business in particular. And I guess everything I do just kind of all drives back to my one goal, which is to keep families on the land and to keep food on the dinner table. And so it takes me to a lot of different avenues, and I'm blessed to be able to speak all across the country on these ag policy issues and these challenges that face farm and ranch families. And along the way, that's kind of how the podcast evolved. I was just meeting so many incredible people on the road. And even though the news is hopeless all the time and it's negative and it's fear driven, I was finding hope and inspiration in all these people I was meeting in rural America that were doing incredible and innovative things to support their families and to keep rural America alive and to keep the American dream alive. And so, it's, to me, agriculture is a people business, and I have a real heart for people. And so I 4 kids at home, but I travel a lot, and we try to make it all work. I guess keep the balls all in the air like so many farm and ranch families do.
Absolutely. So you are 5th generation, correct? What did that journey look like from growing up there and figuring out how that would look when you came back?
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of 3 girls and grew up on this seed stock operation. I have a long line of family members that are involved in the purebred cattle business in different breeds, Charolais and Limousin. My grandpa Arnold Wink was the first guy to bring Charolais cattle to the state of South Dakota in 1958. And then my mom and dad got into the Limousin seed stock business, and we do work together with my mom and dad, but essentially my husband and I are also first generation. That our Angus business is, we're starting from scratch, ground zero, kind of doing our own thing. And it's been a slow and steady build. You know, people ask me, why do you have so many jobs or why do you do so many things? It's because we're literally starting from scratch, the equipment, the land, the cattle, everything. But it's a shared passion and goal we have. And I'm excited to share that it's all kind of coming to fruition after 15 years of selling private treaty. We're having our first bull sale right on the ranch here on President's Day of 2025. So February 17th. So it feels like everything we've been working on is kind of all gearing towards this one big date. So a lot of projects happening on the ranch right now, doing a build to add bathrooms to our shop to be able to host people and just all kinds of things. But it's exciting and it drives us every day. And I'm blessed to have a husband who's as passionate about the cattle business as I am.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on your upcoming sale. It's almost a year away yet, but still, it comes fast. I know.
It does. It does. Yeah, and a lot of it just has to get done this summer. My speaking schedule really kicks up in the fall, winter. So it's like right now is like it feels like crunch time to get it all done. And it's crazy, just all the little things that come with that, like trying to find tables and chairs and build an auction block, and just so there's just a lot of infrastructure things. And then of course keeping an eye on the cattle and the genetics and gathering DNA and all registering, and it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun too.
For sure. For sure. You mentioned that you guys are kind of first generation on your operation that you're doing. And then you have, some things you work together on with your family. That's very similar to what my husband and I are doing here. And I was actually doing media interviews for Kansas FFA state officer candidates yesterday, and we were talking about generational transition. And one of the things that they were talking about was this kind of difference between generational family farms and beginning farmers, and how so often they're not actually that different, because when you don't take over the operation, you kind of build a side branch, you face a lot of the same challenges that those first time farmers do, or ranchers. But it's just such a huge thing to take on. So congratulations on 15 years of, well, probably more than that, of hard work kind of culminating.
Yeah. And I think I speak on this a lot on the road because I see it over and over again. The family dynamics of production agriculture are challenging, whether you're starting from scratch or you have multiple generations, and you see a lot of heartache and a lot of upheaval in those transition years. And I see over and over again, the older generation either can't or won't plan. And so it's just kind of up to like, well, when we die, I guess you guys will figure it out. You have the dynamics of in-laws and off-farm siblings and what is fair, what is equal, what is right. And then you have the younger generation coming in and oftentimes pouring in a lot of sweat equity because that's all they have to offer, right? You don't have cash to infuse in the operation. And then there's that assumption that, well, because I'm here putting in this sweat equity, I deserve this, or this should come to me, this rightfully I'm adding value. And I tell young people a lot, don't build your whole future on the assumption that these assets are going to transfer to you. You need to look at the family business as a business first, and you aren't the owner of those assets. So I always figure my parents and grandparents could give away everything to the church, or they could, lose it in probate court or whatever. That's their business. But for me, it's like I live a half mile from mom and dad. I'm so blessed to be here. If we ever had the opportunity to purchase their land or their herd or their equipment, or, rent to own or whatever it might look like, that's great. But in the meantime, if everything goes south, my husband and I also have firm ground to stand on, where this is land that we own. These are cattle we've bought. This is a business we've built, and we hope that everything kind of complements each other down the road. But it's hard to explain that when I probably didn't have that perspective when I first got home from college, and I just showed up, I was like, well, I have this writing gig, so I'm making money, but here I am on the farm, and everything's going to work out the way I envision it. But that's not how life goes. And so I think it's a humbling thing to realize, it might not, the cards might not all fall into place as I expect them to, but it's not my job to control how other people manage their businesses. All I can do is control my response and what I do with money I make and how I invest it. And so, tough lessons to learn, but yet on the flip side, I'm seeing first generation farmers all across the country that don't have these preconceived notions. They have no assumptions that anything is going to work out for them because they're starting from scratch, and they're wildly successful because they know they have to maximize profit on every acre with every animal. I mean, I met a gal down in Tennessee that's selling skincare products made out of beef tallow, 3-ounce bottles, and she's selling them for $80 a pop. And it's crazy, but yet it's wow, good for you to create a product, use that beef animal nose to tail, and you're figuring out a way to make a go of it, starting completely from scratch with no leg up. So it is doable. It absolutely is, but it takes a lot of creativity and innovation and just a lot of grit too.
Absolutely. There's pros and cons to every situation. One of the pros I think a lot of those first generation farmers or ranchers have is that they don't have to manage that family dynamic that came before them. They have a really tough go of it business and financially, but they have that whole entire piece that they don't have to worry about. And that I think the guest I had on last week, we talked about how family is so dynamic. Like it's not a thing that's set in stone. Your family shifts and changes as people get married or divorce happens or kids are born. Like there's so many factors that influence how that's going to play out. And when you try to tie in business and make it work or develop a plan, you have to know that it's going to potentially change at some point.
Right. And it is a weird transition to go from, your parents, they wiped your butt, they fed you bottles, they took care of you, they bought your car, they, sent you off to college. And then you come home and you transition from, I'm not a kid anymore, I'm an adult. And it's funny because I think agriculture is the only industry where the kid might be 50 years old. And you're like, well, the 70-year-old is still the main operator, but the kid is, a grown man looking at retirement age in any other industry. And so, for me, that's, I had to consider that like, oh, dad still treats me like I'm a 16-year-old kid, even though I'm a 36-year-old mom of four, but that's just the way it is. And then my husband coming into the operation as an in-law, I think it was really important for us that he was able to make his own business decisions instead of being under the umbrella of a father-in-law that had maybe different visions for the cattle. And so it has been hard to start from scratch. It's been a grind, but at the same time, sink or swim, failure or success, like my husband and I get to own it. It just is what it is. And I don't know. Yeah. I think it's really easy to look on Instagram or hear other people's stories and think, oh, they've got it all. They have it so easy, but everybody has something. And I think the goal is to really prioritizing maintaining family relationships and prioritizing, like at the end of the day, land and cattle come and go, but having your parents, your grandparents, and your family close is so important. But then also making that distinction of the family is the family, but the business is the business, and we have to take care of it as a business. And sometimes the waters get muddy when you're, feeding cattle and fixing fence and doing all the things side by side every day together.
Absolutely. I love that you guys have been able to kind of set your own mark out there that's separate and that you have control over. And it gives you this thing that you kind of have agency in to make sure that you have your own thing separate from family. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, of, farm families and ranch families doing that, because like you said, they may not get to a decision-making point in their job or their role until they're 55, 60 years old. That's a really long time. So having something in the meantime while you're maybe transitioning into that role that you can feel in charge of and be able to make decisions on, I think is a really good thing to do.
Yeah. And I think the family business is always in flux too. So I always tell people in my speeches, you have to look at the family farm and ranch like it's a pie. And instead of being a young person and saying, well, I'm back, I want a piece of that pie, give me what I think is mine. You got to say, well, how can I diversify or add value and add to the pie? What else can we serve up using this footprint on this farm that we have without taking away the income that my mom and dad or my grandparents need? I need to be able to add value and not just do the day-to-day grind. I need to bring in additional cash flow. So what does that look like? Is it direct-to-consumer beef sales? Is it agritourism? Is it diversifying with a different breed of cattle or adding sheep? Or what is it that you can do to increase that cash flow so that you truly are increasing the value of that operation?
Absolutely. Well, we've touched a little bit on how diverse your additional things that you do in life are to kind of help build your operation. Let's talk a little bit more about those. Now, I know the political side you are very active in. You also have children's books. Tell us about how all those pieces kind of fit together for you.
Sure. So writing books was always just a bucket list thing for me, but it really became kind of a necessity shortly after Tyler and I got married in 2010, there was a movie that came out called Barnyard, where the cow walks on his back legs and he's a dude with an udder. Like, there's all kinds of things going on in this movie. And then, of course, the farmer is the bad guy in the story. And I just remember being so frustrated by that. And I started looking around, like, were there any books or movies or cartoons that existed that actually showed what agriculture was like? Or is everything a caricature where we're the hicks with the straw in our mouth and the, pitchfork in our hands, and the animals are all talking and the main characters? And I really found it lacking. And so my first book, Levi's Lost Calf, came out in 2011. And I work with an illustrator. Her name's Michelle Weber. She's a mom of 5 out of Minnesota that I went to college with, and she loves to paint, and talented Western artist. And so she's illustrated 9 books with me now. We've produced 9 books together, and every story, the goal is to accurately portray agriculture and to highlight the people who I think are the heroes in the book, and show that, like, the relationship we have with the land and the animals, and not put the animal as like way up here on a tier and the people are kind of the side characters. And so I've taken these books all across the country, from New York City to Los Angeles and everywhere in between. And it's very rewarding and fulfilling work, and kind of probably what catapulted my ag advocacy work off the ranch.
Yeah, I love seeing the stories out there. There's really just nothing else, like you said, that really portrays that side of the story. So it's so refreshing to see that, and amazing work that you and your illustrator have been able to do. So what has that traveling across the country, is that what kind of opened the door for you to do that in other realms of your life, or how did that all happen?
So I was in 4-H and FFA, and always did public speaking contests. So it was one thing my parents really prioritized. They kind of just instinctively knew that no matter what career field us girls would go into, being able to communicate is, a marketable skill. And so we were the nerdy kids doing speech contests all growing up, and we really enjoyed it. And my sisters and I, but someone had heard me speak when I was 19 years old and had said, "Hey, you could be a professional speaker." And I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that was a real career, and I thought, oh, that's got to be so hard to get into. But word of mouth kind of spread, and I just kind of continued to put myself out there and develop my message. And now I book about 50 speeches a year, kind of traveling. So take the books all over and speak on a lot of different issues, from the family business dynamic to how to bulletproof your business for all the volatility that we experience in agriculture, and throw in global pandemics and all the things, like how do you manage your business that way? I talk about ag advocacy issues, ag policy, that kind of thing. Timely issues that are facing producers, animal rights activists, climate change extremists, just a lot of, I probably have 10 or 11 different topics now that I speak on, and it just continues to evolve. But probably one of the funnest ones is now my daughter Scarlett has her own book out titled Scarlett and Lucky, and she's been getting speaking invites. So we're like a mother-daughter duo a lot of times, and she gets on stage and speaks, and it's a lot of fun to just kind of see the next generation. I could retire now, I guess, and she could just take over. But it's a lot of fun to include her along for the ride.
That's really cool. 50 a year sounds like so many. And I'm sure you travel for other things as well. So thinking about like most farmer and ranchers' schedules, they're struggling to get off the farm maybe once, twice a year. I know for me personally, if I leave the farm for like 8 hours, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was a struggle. But how do you make that work? Just vulnerability wise, like that's a big thing to tackle.
Yeah. So it wasn't like this before COVID. 2019, I was probably maybe doing, 15, 20 a year consistently for 10 years or so. And I was supposed to have the best year I ever had in 2020. And of course, when COVID hit, I lost a year's worth of work like overnight. And we had just bought land, and we had just bought a tractor. And I talk about this in my speech of like, that income was earmarked for very specific things. And so it was a super stressful time. And then I kind of we homeschooled our kids for 3 years, and Tyler and I are foster parents. So during that time, during the lockdown, we had brought a dozen kids into our home. We just kind of nestled down and we just hunkered down and enjoyed family life. And actually it was a beautiful time. We adopted a little boy out of foster care during that time. And I think when the world kind of opened up again and I started getting speech invites, I kind of thought, maybe my time was over. Like, no one would invite me anymore. And so part of it is probably a fear-based thing of like, every speech invite I get, I'm going to take because I never know when it's going to be taken away again. That's probably not a good way to live, but I guess I'm fulfilled by meeting all the people and getting to help families and be boots on the ground, either at conferences or auction sales. And so it fuels me. But yeah, I'm like you, leaving the farm is like, it's like an act of Congress. But for me, it's like every week. So yeah, vulnerability moment, having 4 kids at home and all these cattle, it's super hard to be on the road. And so my husband's amazing. He just takes the kids everywhere. So these kids are literally boots on the ground doing cattle stuff all the time. We did find a good Christian school in town that they're going to now after 3 years of homeschooling, which has been a huge blessing for us. But yeah, people ask me all the time, like, why don't you fly? Well, I don't fly very often. And the reason is I can do a speech. I can literally get in the vehicle and drive home through the night. So I'm like that crazy mom that's sleeping in truck stops and, getting home at 5 a.m. so I can be awake or, I can be there for my kids when they wake up in the morning. So I don't know if it's like a healthy way to live, but it's the season of life we're in right now and we're making it work.
Yeah, that's exactly what my husband does as well. He's like, I'll just drive through the night. No problem there. But
as long as you can stay awake, right? And
right, yeah,
gas stations sometimes, but it gets a little ranchy on the road. But it's always I pray a lot. I find a lot of time to pray driving and a lot of time to think about things that matter. And it's always and every time I pull into the driveway, it's just like, what a blessing. I just thank God. Like, thank you for giving me these opportunities to speak, but thank you for getting me back home to these kids. Because at the end of the day, being a wife and mother is really all that truly matters. And the rest of it is extra.
Well, I appreciate you being so vulnerable about how that works for you and your family, because I think a lot of us, especially moms, kind of put this shame or guilt on ourselves for wanting to make life work and be able to fill all the boxes of things that fuel us and make us passionate, when we know that sometimes that means leaving the kids at home or doing other things that don't involve them. And I think that's important to just let other people know that is something that can work for your family if you can make it work for your family, basically.
Well, and I've gotten really good advice from some great mentors over the years. And one of my great mentors is Jolene Brown, another incredible speaker. She's in her 70s and she's an icon in agriculture. But she had told me, Amanda, you can do everything, but you can't always do it right now. So the season of life you're in, you have to give yourself a lot of grace, and you can only do what you can do. And so, yeah, I might be speaking all over the country, but the dishes maybe aren't washed in my sink, or my house might be a mess, or I'm a creative person. I like time to be able to create or do just like I used to like paint furniture. I used to do things like just to get the wheels spinning. I don't have time for any of that anymore. It's like I don't have hobbies. I don't have extras. Like, my hobbies are the kids and the cattle. And yeah, in another time in my life, will I have time to sit down and read books and create things and craft and do things just for fun? Yeah, probably. But in this season, I have to say no to a ton of stuff in order to say yes to the things that really matter. So I talk about that in my speeches a lot too, of like doing a full audit on your life and figuring out what are your big top priorities. For me, it's my faith, it's my family, it's our farm business. Well, I should put my husband ahead of that. So yeah, so faith and family would be marriage and then children, and then our business and kind of everything else in this season. It's like we look very carefully at what extracurriculars are we signing the kids up for? Can we actually do it without sacrificing something else? One thing I look at all the time is, okay, since family is a top bucket priority list for me, an important part of that is having dinners together, suppers together around the dining room table where we can pray and enjoy a meal together. If I'm signing my kids up for 100 different sports, we're not doing that anymore. And so is it worth that sacrifice? And so everything in life, there's a pro and con to. And I think it's important just to really weigh out things that really matter. Do they fill your important buckets, or do they distract you from those buckets? And society will tell you, you should do all these things and you can do all these things. But if it's at the expense of the things that truly matter, it's just busy. It's just chaos. And so I spend a lot of time editing my life too. And I'm learning, it's very hard. I'm learning to say no to things, which I'm kind of a people pleaser. So I don't know how to say no, which is why I end up doing way more than I should. But another piece of advice I got recently was every time you say yes to something else, you're saying no to your children and your family. And so that weighs heavily on me too. So when I say yes to something, I'm all in. But if I say no, please don't ask me twice, because it was really, really hard for me to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. That understanding, that true understanding of your priorities, I think can do so much for a person's life. But it can feel like a lot of chaos when you don't take the time to know what they are, or if you spend time like maybe saying yes to things that you shouldn't, and then trying to regain that balance or kind of claw your way back out of right. that to what your true priorities are. It is very important. You mentioned something about like during COVID, when you lost all of those speaking engagements and you had that money earmarked for things in your operation, how like challenging that was. And I think that wasn't something that I planned on talking about today, but that balance of entrepreneurship or having like a business that you operate and farming or ranching is an interesting thing that I'm starting to like find this common thread with a lot of podcast guests, that we have these multifaceted businesses that we utilize to build the operation.
Yeah.
And it's something that is very interesting when you bring entrepreneurship into it, because you have so many variables happening all at the same time. There's a lot of risk involved in agriculture. There's a lot of risk involved in entrepreneurship. How do you kind of balance that and figure out what comes, what goes, what gives at any point?
I think the ability to diversify and pivot as needed and pivot quickly is super important. And balancing that with not losing focus, because you're so spread thin in a lot of different directions. And that's where that audit comes in really important too. So I started out my career as a freelancer. I sent out letters to, I mean, I'm super old, but like in those days, it was like letters of inquiry to 30 different publications saying, I'd love to write for you. I'd love to freelance. Here's some sample work. And I got 28 rejection letters. Number 29 said, yeah, you can submit a recipe in the women's section for free, which I did, but just for the exposure. But it was like, no, I actually have to pay some bills with this, and I want to be a serious journalist. So this isn't what I had in mind. But lucky number 30 was a newspaper out of Western South Dakota, the Tri-State Livestock News, that said, yeah, we need 2 articles a week. When can you start? And so I did that all through college, and I did that for many, many years and added more freelancing gigs. And then over time, as my career evolved and I was speaking more and doing the books, all of a sudden writing newspaper articles every week, even though it was my foundation, it wasn't paying the bills like the other things were. And so I had to cut those. I had to move away, transition away. It's like in COVID, when I lost a year's worth of work, I really didn't have the option to just be like, well, I'm not making money this year, I guess. So I already had the website built, amandaradke.com, for my books. I basically, within a week, I was buying inventory, sweatshirts and T-shirts and toys and other things that people could buy, because I'm like, well, I'm at home. I guess this is what I'll do. And thankfully, it was a blessing. It took off and it became this huge business I wasn't expecting. And I was doing it with foster babies, in my baby carrier, packaging orders in my basement at 3 a.m., while the other kids slept. And I remember at one point, my husband had said to me, like, I never dreamed of becoming an Amazon shipper when I grew up. And I said, well, yeah, but we bought that stupid tractor and we bought all this land. And so like, this is what we got to do in this moment. And so I think it's the ability to really humble yourself of like, yeah, I have this vision of life of what what I think I want to do with my career and my life and where I think I want to go. But then saying, you know what, I'm not too good for any job. I am willing to get in the trenches and do whatever it needs to do to get the job done. And I think that humility and that the ability to be super scrappy, especially in times like a pandemic when everyone's losing their minds and panicking, if you can just focus in on something and see the opportunities that exist, which usually are when you're solving a problem that somebody else has. That's where the great business ideas are. If you can, when everyone else is running in one direction, screaming and freaking out, and you can kind of charge in to that area and fix a problem, it could be your $1 million idea. And so, that's agriculture in a nutshell. We have the land, we have livestock, we have these assets, but the constant question is, are we utilizing these assets to maximum profitability? Are we creating pathways to profitability so we're not struggling? And that's changing the mindset of rural America, because we have been sold this bill of goods that we should barely break even, or the commodity prices, we should just accept what we're given. And I don't think that works. I think there's a reason we're losing 1,300 cow-calf producers every year in this country, 2,500 dairy farms in this country every year. In the last 20 years, we've lost 75% of our family-owned feed yards, and we lose millions of acres of land to development or conservation programs or government programs. And that's the political side I get involved with. It's like, you see this trend to eliminate the family farm business. And I don't believe that there is a political will in our politicians in DC or on a state level to fix these things. And that's where entrepreneurship really has to kick in. That's where the free market capitalism, your free will to create something, has to become an overdrive, because nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And so what can you do that's innovative and creative to create pathways to profitability? Because if we don't, I'm afraid the family farm and ranch is in serious trouble.
That first, I want to just say, you shipping items out of your basement at 3 a.m. with a baby in your baby carrier. That's like the exact definition, I think, of a farmer or rancher, that just grit and resiliency to get the job done, however you got to do it to make ends meet. Like, it reminds me so much of the stories that my husband's grandma tells of, like, well, we started doing this because that changed and we had to make ends meet. So we started raising bottle cows on nurse cows and, whatever. But that's the modern day version of how we make it work.
You should write these stories down too. I think about that. Like, if I ever get frustrated to where our business is at and where I want it to go, like, this is taking too long, I only have to rewind to where we started. And like, where Tyler and I started is the farm we bought it a month after our wedding date, and we had no money, and we didn't plan on buying the farm at that time. It just kind of, the timing happened that way. But I was instantly regretting all the money we had spent on this wedding. Like, why did I buy so much for flowers? Or why did we invite so many people? Like, we can't afford it because we need a down payment for this farm. And the only way we had the down payment was we received just enough wedding gifts, like cash gifts, to be able to scrounge together enough of a down payment. And I remember thinking, I don't even know why the bank is giving us this mortgage. There's no way we'll ever pay for this mortgage. And in our first year of marriage, we rented out every building on the whole place for storage to other people. It took us 3 years to even put a cow of our own on the place. And we rented out our basement to tech kids. So we literally, as newlyweds, had drunk college kids living with us. And we pulled an old abandoned tractor out of the trees that my dad wasn't using anymore. And that was our first tractor, like a Model M. And I think back to that, like, what a disaster. Like, it was so hard. But yet it's like, okay, look at that. And you put your nose to the ground and you did the work, and look how far we've come. And so I think giving yourself grace too, I might not be where I want to be, but I'm starting. And if I keep doing the day-to-day things every day to inch closer to my goal, man, we're going to get somewhere, and we'll be able to look back and say, wow, here's how far we've come.
Absolutely. I used to work on an orchard when I was in college, and Frank was the name of the owner, and he said a lot of really great things. But one of them was that he said, if you want to have a thriving and successful business, you have to live like you have absolutely no money and be willing to do what no one else will do to get there. And sounds like exactly what you guys did. Like, that sounds like such a trying time. And you probably questioned yourself a lot during those early years, I'm guessing, of like, what the heck are we doing? Because those are not small steps to take to make ends meet.
Right. Well, and as money starts flowing, I think there is that tendency too to increase your standard of living. To, like, I had just priced out our farmhouse is really old, and I had priced out doing a kitchen remodel, and I was so excited about it. And then I saw that final price, and I thought, well, there's no way I can make money on this. There's no ROI on this. And my kids are so hard on the house anyway. I might as well, like, forget Instagram. I unfollowed all the pretty house, pages that were getting me like, my house doesn't look like this, and you get that comparison, that thief of joy, right? And so we abandoned the project, and I'm like, well, this is the kitchen we have, and it might be plywood cupboards and it might be falling apart, but I got 3 boys and they're feral anyway, so they're going to destroy this place in this season of life. So it is what it is. But then, I mean, as we're saying no to that kitchen project, we're remodeling a barn instead, because, that is part of our business. And so
it is ROI there.
Yeah, there's ROI there. So it's denying yourself a lot. It's saying no. It's saying no to a lot of things in order to say yes to the things that can advance your business forward. And that does take a lot of self-denial and control, and and we do, I guess, to keep things in perspective for our kids, we involve them in the business. So we tell them every day how they're playing a role in this. And like, yeah, your friends might be going to Disney World that they're hearing about at school, or they might be doing this and this on the weekend, but we're working on this business together, and we tell about the long-term vision of, I want to be able to build businesses that all 4 of my kids, if they wanted to, could be a part of something that I'm thinking long-term and not right now. And with that does come, I'll be honest, mom guilt of like, am I depriving them of fun memory making? And yet I think, how many kids get to literally build businesses alongside their mom and dad? How many kids get to see that struggle of their parents, but then see them overcome these challenges? And even the other day, we had a calf that bloated, and my daughter was out there helping us treat this calf. And I mean, she literally saw the stomach shrink down, and the calf felt so much better. And I took a picture of her with that bull calf, and I said, Scarlett, like, we're going to remember this, because when we sell this bull in February and you saved this calf's life, like, you can be proud of that. You did something. You played a role in this farm to help us. And so I don't know. I hope we're doing, you never know in parenting. Are we doing it right? I have no idea. But that's kind of the mentality we have of like, we talk constantly about the big dreams for the future, hoping that we're planting these seeds that, like, yeah, it's a hard life, but it's a good life, and it's a rewarding life. And our faith and our family can be at the center of it, even if it's not glamorous and fun all the time.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that about your kitchen, because same. And talking to kids about
farmhouse kitchens, they have character, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's such a beautiful story about your daughter. When we just moved to this farm. My husband's grandma sold it to us last year. And when we moved, my oldest had a lot of like big feelings about moving, because he was a kindergartner. He had his friends there, just a life that he was used to. And we struggled with that a lot when we first moved, of him asking, like, why did we have to do this? Why did we come here? It was a big adjustment. And talking about those things of like, we did this for our family, for our future. And this is like the vision that we have and that we see. And it was just so cool to see him like truly understand that and be like, wow, like, mom and dad didn't do this just on a whim or just because. They did it because they want me to have a good future, and they want me to have opportunities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So
it's special, isn't it? It's like,
it really is.
You're like tearing up a little bit, but it's that to me, like, just seeing your emotion, your heart for this industry, this industry is a family deal. And right now, I mean, even in South Dakota, we talked about policy or politics. Like there are politicians that don't see our private property rights as a thing, that if a big corporation can come on the land and add to the tax base, well, we're going to plop a carbon pipeline or wind towers or solar panels or whatever, because they're more important than you. And I truly believe, unless like our future in this country depends on families like yours that can stay on the land, and not only just because it's the right thing to do and because it's our rich heritage and all those things, but it's food security, it's freedom, it's the ability to have a dream. I think about this all the time as I'm out like feeding cattle, and I look at this pasture that we bought, and it's beautiful, and it leads into the James River, and it's just gorgeous place to live and raise kids. And I just think about it like, if some of these politicians have their way, they can strip all this away from us. They can take away these dreams that we have of maybe having a kid build a house right here on the farm. Or so to me, that really is what fuels me to do the 50 speeches a year. It's because I'm meeting these families. These families are worth fighting for. They need a voice. They need to be activated themselves to go fight for themselves, because no association, no university, no business is going to fight for you harder than you. And you're doing it every day on the land with your family and what you have to do in the day-to-day grind. But the fact is, there are wolves at our gates, and they want to gobble us up. And I'm not going to go down without a fight. I just am not. And so that, like, to me, and maybe some people don't like that, but to me, every time I speak on these issues, it is because of these families that I know and care about. And it's my family that I am passionate about. And somebody's got to fight for them. It's otherwise, I don't like what the future looks like at all.
I'm so glad you could join us today. You can support the mission of the Farming on Purpose podcast and be part of the tribe dedicated to building ag legacies at farmingonpurpose.com/shop. You'll find apparel, office supplies, stickers, planners, and more, all inspired by the people living out ag legacies every day. Well, I'm grateful for the work that you're doing to bring a voice to these issues, because you're right, the wolves are at the gate. And you mentioned quite a few stats just a little bit ago about the number of family farms and dairies and family feedlots that we're losing, in the land that we're losing every year, and the lack of just political will to fight for those, or to see that as even a problem or something to be concerned about. What is some things that I guess you have uncovered as you've worked more closely in these political realms that you think more people in rural areas who are on the land fighting for things should know about?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak on this topic. When I first got started, the animal rights activists were the big thing, that they were seeking to take animals off the land. And I thought it was because they tried to stand on some moral high ground, that they cared about the animals. But I've come to realize it's an attack on private property rights. They don't want you to be able to own and manage land or livestock and pets or horses, cattle, whatever, as you see fit. They want to be able to control that, because if they can control the animals, they can control the food and the people. Now, fast forward 15 years later, we're seeing this climate change agenda come into town, and this Green New Deal agenda, and the Biden administration's 30 by 30 plan, which is to take 30% more of the land and put it in the federal government's control. And at the core of all of these conversations of, we need to control our carbon footprint, we need to be more sustainable, we need to protect the natural resources and leave the land pristine. And if the government controls it, then ruminant animals can't graze on it. We can't log, we can't mine, we can't do these things. At the core of it all is an attack on our private property rights. It's an attack on our sovereignty and our liberty to be free citizens. And I truly believe producers on the land are like the last really free people in America. And so what I tell people is, right now there's this whole push to get us to sign up for all of these carbon credit programs, all of these carbon index score type things. And what I'm telling people is the devil is in the details on these deals, because the bench post is constantly going to move. You're never going to be green enough or sustainable enough for people that actually hate you and want you off the land. And be very careful who you invite on your land, because the control that they gain when you sign some of these programs is not worth any dollar amount. And unfortunately, in agriculture, it's very divided. That's not necessarily a popular thing to say, because I mean, I have farmers that tell me, well, Amanda, we know the Green New Deal is bogus, but there's money to be made. It's like the Wild West. It's the easy money train coming from 45Q tax credits from our government. But yet it's not right. And it's based on the premise of a lie. And it's a pathway of producing nothing, and it's a pathway to starvation. And so we need America's farmers and ranchers to stand up and say, we know this is not based on sound science. We know this government program is not based on common sense or sound science, and we know it's wrong. And we can do things in the private sector without taking government dollars to build our businesses. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff that is voluntary now that people are getting paid very well for, in short order, it will become mandatory for every producer to measure their carbon score, their ESG scores, whatever. And it's a mechanism for control and attack on private property rights. So yeah, this kind of stuff plagues me at night. It really worries me and stresses me out, because I'm just playing it out and seeing it. And I don't like where we're headed. But yet I have a lot of hope that the American producer will stand strong and stay firm in what our core tenets are. And I believe the core tenets of agriculture in rural America is faith, family, and producing food for the world.
Well, I think you hit the money there with, the programs come at it as a means to profitability, which we know that so many farmers and ranchers struggle with. So having that just easy path, and it's not always easy, there's a lot of stipulations to follow, but that kind of dangling carrot to do this program is always there. And I think it's interesting. You're probably one of the few people that I hear speak about this in this way. And yeah, I'm not sure why that is. I think a lot of people see it this way, but they don't speak about it this way.
Well, I'll tell you this, if I could get a lot more speech invites if I didn't speak this way, because it does make people very uncomfortable. It's a lot of the associations are going in that direction, or they've really centered on this sustainability movement. And my whole thing has always been, we are already an environmental success story. We need to be celebrating that from the rooftops, not negotiating with people who want access to our land and want to take away our leverage in the marketplace by seizing control of those important assets that we have. And so it's kind of a hold the line moment that I'm just not going to go there. And I feel like also my faith doesn't allow me to either, because I think a lot of this emission scores and carbon measuring, I think it's godlessness. I think it's a pathway to communism. I think it's anti-human. And at the end of the day, I see this playing out where every human in America has to justify their carbon footprint. Well, if I just don't exist, that's net zero, right? It's a depopulation movement to me. And so I don't like a future where I'm going to have to be scored if I drive a gas or diesel vehicle, or I eat a steak because the government deemed that as anti-climate friendly. And that's where we're headed. And when we cooperate with all of that, we are just advancing that forward. And so, yeah, it's not popular. People could paint me as a conspiracy theorist, but to me, the writing's on the wall, and it's just kind of a hill I'll die on. I'm not going to play these games with the government that clearly doesn't want producers on the land and would prefer if we were all starving, because we're easier to control that way.
That conspiracy theorist word, I think, gets tossed around a lot, but you work in a lot of these professional circles with people who are in associations with that, have favored some of the other routes to these programs. How do you balance that when you are using strong language as you are, and speaking about your beliefs and the way that things are unfolding and how you feel about them, with people meeting you with that idea of, well, you're just completely off base. You've gone to the loony bin and this is not how it is.
I learned a very humbling and important lesson during COVID when I lost that year's worth of work. And I spent a lot of time in prayer, really grew in my faith fostering and having these kids from very hard places come and stay with us and realizing what really matters, especially at the grand scheme of things when I see all these political games. And yet 1 in 4 kids goes to bed hungry at night while 40% of our food ends in landfills. And I started thinking about what is my role in all of this. And I realized that I don't think God gave me a platform so I could make a lot of money speaking and being super popular and, just saying what every corporation and association wants me to say because that is the rhetoric or the narrative. I think the Lord gave me a platform, number one, so I could share my faith. And so I could stand strong in the faith and be an example of that and being a follower of Jesus, but also to speak the truth. And what I found is the more I lean into that, the more speech invites I get, not because necessarily everyone agrees with me, but because it is the truth. And the audiences resonate with the truth when it's authentic and not, this is what I think people want me to say. It's just, this is the God honest truth. And the people in my audiences are hurting and they need help and they need hope. And if I can provide that, well, like the consequences will be what they'll be. And what I found is the Lord has blessed me in a lot of ways, given me new opportunities to work with people who also believe in the truth and are fearless in sharing the truth. And he's probably taken people out of my life and taken opportunities away. And it's probably a blessing. It's probably okay. And so I stand rooted in that. And since I've kind of had that epiphany, I've surrounded myself with really great people. A great mentor I have is Chris Earl with CK6 Consulting. I work with him in the Angus business. We have about 30 clients across the country that we help boots on the ground with their sales and helping through the family dynamics and the challenges of business. But the biggest thing I learned from him is being bold in your faith and being fearless. And the great thing is when all this was happening, and during that time, I was also fired from Beef Magazine. I'd written for them for 13 years, 4 blog posts a week. And my final blog post the day I got fired was about prayer life on the farm. And so it was just fitting. But he had told me, Amanda, this is going to be the best thing that's ever happened to you. And I want to be there for you as you go through this. And it has. Now I have my own media channels. I can write whatever I want. I can say whatever I want. I don't have to worry about a corporate thing hanging the pressure over my head to speak a certain way, to not lose advertisers and that kind of thing. And I would encourage everyone to really look at their values and what they stand for, and don't get yourself pigeonholed into a job or a career where you have to go against those values in order to save your paycheck. And that goes back to diversifying and being able to pivot. And heck, if I never get a speech invite again, I'll be okay, because I have these other things and I can have the wherewithal to say I can still take care of my family. I don't have to bend a knee to things I don't believe in just to make money. And that to me is worth its weight in gold, just being able to speak the truth and not really be fearful of the consequences.
I so admire your conviction. We live in a world where we're constantly just barraged with information, and it can be very confusing to find the truth sometimes. And it's very apparent to me that you feel very strongly about the truth that you have found. What kind of advice do you have for other folks who are facing all of this information? They aren't sure maybe which path is right for them or what things make sense for them. What kind of steps can they take to get started?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty broad question. I could go in a lot of different directions. I think for me, the foundation is having a good prayer life of discerning what is good and true and right, and versus what is maybe a distraction or what is just not the wrong path. So there's been a lot of opportunities that have come my way in the last couple of years. One being a TV show that I thought, this is the thing. This is what we're going to do as a family. And yet I was so unsettled about the whole thing. We shot 4 or 5 episodes and it never went. I wouldn't even say I got cold feet. I just spent so much time praying about it that I realized I have to walk away from this TV deal. I've got 10 sponsors lined up. I've got advertisers. It was going to be instantly a moneymaker, and yet it just wasn't right. And the second I, got brave enough to disappoint people and tell them like, we can't do this show. It was just instant peace in my heart. And so I think when you're praying on everything that you do and you're in counsel with the Lord, and not just your ego, not just your ambitions, not just earthly things, but does this align with the bigger picture? I think you can't go wrong. You really can't. So a perfect example of this, our South Dakota primaries coming up. I had a ton of pressure from people to run for office this year just because I spent so much time testifying on things in our capital. And you'd make a great legislator. And for a hot minute, I did consider it. I looked at, well, how could this fit into my life? How could I do it? And I finally just had to tell a whole bunch of people, the Lord is not telling me to do this. And so even if I want to go in there and just fix everything and vote the right way and do these things, he's not calling me to that. And so I can't. I have to say no. So being in prayer life, getting good people surrounding you, good people that are grounded in the truth and that will support you, mentor you, and encourage you when time gets tough, like things get hard, which they will. It's so important. And so if people you're following on Instagram make you feel a certain way or give you that comparison game or don't lift you up or don't challenge you to grow and be a better person, stop following it and fill your feeds, fill your social media with people that encourage, with people that uplift, with people that align with your values, and be unapologetic in that. And the rest will kind of come along the rest will be fruitful if you do those basic things.
It's great broad advice to a broad question. Very applicable. Thank you. Well, as we kind of wrap things up today, please let people know where they can find you and how they can learn more about what you do.
Yeah, well, I so appreciate this opportunity. I feel like we could talk for hours. I'm so glad to be able to finally connect with you. So everyone can follow me I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, just my name, Amanda Radke. The podcast is on Apple and Spotify, The Heart of Rural America. And then my website is amandaradke.com. And then we didn't have time to talk about it, but just within a couple days, I have a new auction platform that's going to be coming out because, myself with some great partners are very passionate about creating those new pathways for beef producers to be profitable. And so this new company coming out is called Bid on Beef, and the website is bidonbeef.com. And I would encourage people to check it out and see the platform. And we're really, I guess the concept is just to put consumers in the driver's seat where they get to connect with ranchers and they get to tell ranchers what they think their beef is worth. And so it's going to be an exciting thing that's going to keep me busy. And I would encourage people to follow along. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I apologize we didn't quite get to that. I'm so glad you threw it in there, and we'll link to it in the show notes. But I think, based on what we discussed today, it's a culmination of everything that you're working for. So I'm glad for all the work that you're doing. Check out Amanda Radke on all of the different social media, her website, and she did provide a discount code for you guys if you want to buy things off her website. So we'll drop that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing as well.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.